Hello, divas. Welcome back to the channel. I cannot believe that it is already October. But since it is, today I wanted to talk about all of the books that I read in September. I was trying to put this video together and I was like going through the books that I read and I only disliked one book, which, listen, if you've been around for a minute, that we're trending positively. You know, depending on the month, we don't always have that good of an average. So I'm feeling good about this. This is exciting. Let's dive in. First up, Great Black Hope. We read this for book club, and it was an intense meeting, to say the least. It did not work for me almost in any way. That said, there was one sentence that I did really love. To Smith, it seemed the two spoke in a language of their own, pulling from a murky gumbo of pop culture obscura references oat and homegrown. That is everything. That is a beautifully, brilliantly crafted sentence. Unfortunately, I did not feel that that brilliance was taken all the way through the work. It's like when you're, if you've got like this container, right? And it has sediment in it. And all this sediment has kind of settled at the bottom. That's how this book felt, but like almost in reverse. The overwriting all felt like it took place at the top. And I felt like it was really overwrought and really overwritten and didn't quite know what it wanted to be with all of this dense level of attention that was misplaced. And then as you went through the work, it became something else, and this overwrittenness kind of drifted away, and then it became another book, and then it didn't, the pacing and the verbiage and everything about it. The premise of the book is that a young Black man goes to the Hamptons, crouches in the corner and does a key bump and is then arrested. I'm going to be honest, that premise alone lost me. And I tried to get back because I was reading it for book club, and so I really wanted to get through it to the end. But immediately, you lost me. Have been to the Hamptons, have been to some of these events, have been around people who might have been imbibing, and that's not a key bump, a key bump crouched in a corner. That's just not what's happening. That immediately set me in a place of I don't think I trust this author. And then it just kind of all unraveled from there. I started dog-earing all of these pages at the bottom for substantiation for how and why this book didn't work for me. I felt that the writing was uneven. I felt that the author didn't really know who the book was for. And I spoke to someone at a book event, and they said it was for the literati, the literary fiction of it all. And that almost makes it worse for me. And but yet also maybe brought some of it into sharper focus because it felt maybe you were trying to write that book. And when you try to write that book, I think it's a lot harder to land the plane. Write in your style, write how you write. And I think that might have been what the overwroughtness part of it potentially was, right? Some people liked it. It didn't ring true. He also attempts to get sober. But then at some point completely abandons the journey to sobriety. But we started, again, I'm thinking about that sediment quality. We started where it was this is a book about sobriety, or this is a book about getting sober. And then as you move on, it abandons that completely. And there are also elements of this that do not ring true for someone who is attempting to get sober or who is sober as the book moved through on its way to abandoning that plot entirely. It just didn't work. And we had an interesting conversation about like explanatory commas, because I was like, I think that what the core of the issue is that like, is identifying who the book is for, right? Because all of these, there is an intended audience, and I don't think it necessarily maybe has to be so specific as a demographic, but I think that the way you write certain elements can be, you can make it clear that you're not writing for a specific demographic, is maybe the conversation, yeah? And we were talking a lot about like explanatory commas, and the idea is like when you are talking about a world that has certain assumptions associated with it, an explanatory comma is potentially not necessary if you're writing to that audience. It's like, oh, we all know this reference. We all know this place. We all know these terms, yeah? And the explanatory comma to me calls out like, I'm giving context to these terms, to this environment, for those that are not a part of that. So therefore, it says to me, if you're giving me explanatory commas or like content within like an explanatory comma, big quotes, that book is then not innately for those groups of people. So to me, there were elements of this that were like very much not for queer people, because there were a lot of I feel like explanatory commas around some of those subjects and some of those topics. I also felt like it's not for sober people in New York City, because there were explanatory commas that were associated with that. Like there was elements about Keith Haring, which like with explanatory commas. So like, okay, that's one example of like not explicitly being for queer people. And it's about like a bathroom on one of the floors of the LGBTQ center where like there are a lot of meetings for folks who are in recovery. And the sober community, if you are a part of that sober community, you have been a queer person, you have been through that space and you have been into those meetings. And like, so it's just, again, with the explanatory commas around that felt like, oh, okay, so this is not for queer sober people. Like just, and like those instances kind of abounded to the point where it was like, who is this for? What is this for? And it was just odd. It didn't sit well with me. I felt like a lot of the things didn't ring true. Also, at some point, the protagonist goes back to their hometown in the South, and the way that they talk about religion did not ring true, and the way that this family was like so religious, but yet didn't have like an express religious community, and like bopped around like. Again, while some of these things can be anecdotally true, right, to a unique character or a unique family, it wasn't presented in a way that made something unique about this character. It almost felt like it was spoken as like swaths of truth and swaths of like held understanding. And that was just what took me out. And unfortunately, it was not for me. I think I felt like it kind of held itself in a little bit of esteem in a way that also undercut it. Unfortunately, this one, 10 toes on the ground, was just not one that worked for me. Now, it's worked for some other people. And listen, the way we talked about in the Booker shortlist video that I did, which I'll link up here, we are all having different experiences reading the same book, right? Like we're all reading different books, even though the book is the same. So I'm not looking to negate anyone's positive experience in reading this work, but I am giving my experience reading this work. And for me, this did not work. Next up, necessary fiction. Now we're into books that I loved. So, yay. We're skipping into the sunset, but good news. I would say stick around to the end, because like these are all I would recommend most, if not all of these. So, necessary fiction is okay. I think that there are multiple ways to look at it. First of all, thank you to Simon, who got me a signed copy, and this is the UK edition. Though the American cover is like akin to this. I think they did a beautiful job of like creating covers that were very like complementary, and while different, I feel that they like easily speak to each other, and you could see the title, like the covers next to each other, and be like, oh yeah, I see that these are the same book, just like published in different markets, which I think is really cool. So, this is a work set in Nigeria, and I would argue its main focus is to uncover and dissect the themes of queerness, and being Nigerian, and trauma, yeah, and death, and mental health. And I feel that the author does this very successfully and creates an environment that is very digestible by taking these themes and exploring them through myriad characters. There are many, many characters in this work, to the point that there is a cast of characters page. Yeah, but don't let it intimidate you. I think that this is one of the key things about enjoying this work, I think, is focusing on the themes and allowing these characters to be the vehicle for which you interpret and dissect these very complicated, intense themes that I think are handled really beautifully and are just so universally human, but yet specifically Nigerian, and yet like also like specifically queer, but totally and completely universal. Does that make any sense? It's almost hard to explain unless you've read it. I think that the writing is beautiful. One of the things I loved about this was that the voice is very singular. The voice is very clear. It's very like clearly this author's voice, and that is so exciting to me. I have their first book, Vagabonds, which I cannot wait to read. I'm so excited. One of the other books that I read this month was Seascraper, which I really loved. It was longlisted for the Booker Prize this year. I've talked about it on another video. I'll link here, maybe going a little bit more in depth on that video. I think it's a lovely jewel box of a novel. I think that it is to be read, I think, in like a single sitting. I was speaking to a friend about it recently, and I do think that it can be a little heavy on your heart. So I think like know that going into it. There's a little bit of like melancholy and like sadness that comes with both the reading experience as well as kind of like the hangover from the novel. So that's something to keep in mind. It's a tale of a shrimper and what happens when like a stranger comes to town and promises him a new life, basically, and or the potential of a new life. And what I really think of it as is that this stranger opened a window for our protagonist to see life outside of 3 feet in front of him. And then things happen and things change, and the shrimper is kind of left to pick up the pieces of the life that has started to take new shape around him. And in doing that, I felt a little bit of hope, because I felt like while at one point in time we thought, oh my gosh, by opening this window, there's like a whole new world out there and everything is going to change. And instead, I felt like our shrimper was able to take that experience, and instead of like going through the window to this whole new world, he was able to like turn around and look back at his life and see it through a new lens. And so while everything didn't change, everything changed because he was able to take everything in a new way. Does that make any sense? I think it's really beautiful. It's easy to get through. The writing is gorgeous. I will say, for me and the type of reader that I am, I think it laid everything out there a little obviously, and not in like a pejorative way, but just like and I've said this on another video. Like I think it's a great like book to study for like a literary class, right? Because it's like I feel that the author like lays out like, this is what we're doing, this is what's coming, like oh, is this foreshadowing? You know what I mean? And I don't think he does it in a way that is like not successful. I just think he does it in a way that, like, for me as a reader, it's just like slightly obvious. And I prefer, like, I like to dig a little bit more and I like a little more subtlety. But that's a personal thing. And that has nothing to do with the success, I think, of those themes. I just think, like, know that going in. If you're also that type of reader, I think knowing that that is the way that the author approaches the themes and the work will help you enjoy it better. Okay. Now, I did like an interesting like audiobook slash physical book experience where some of this next book I read just physical, some of it I did a little like audio, and then some of it I did listening to the audio while I was physically reading the book, which was a unique experience, but I enjoyed it. And that was The Amazing Adventures of Kavalier and Clay. I'm way late to the party. You all have maybe all read this. It is at its core about two cousins and the comic book characters that they create. And from that, we get love affairs, we get children, we go to war, we tackle fascism and the Nazis and Hitler specifically, and we talk about American greed, and we talk about homosexuality, and we talk about the struggles of America, we talk about mental health. I think that it tackles a lot. And I read it because the Metropolitan Opera produced an operatic adaptation of this book. Now, when I finished the book, I was like, I like this. I didn't love it, but I was like, okay. I thought some of the writing was like a little sparse, which you could argue is like to mimic some of what's going on in the comic book, like, is space, right? Which I think that was interesting. I will say part 6 of this book, it's split into 6 parts. Part 6 was brilliant. I thought that it packed such an incredible emotional punch that like, it's wildly beautiful. And I do think that while certain sections leading up to that were different levels of success in their execution, I think that that part 6 brought it all together in such a beautiful way that it made up for any potential lack of like love, because I don't even want to say shortcomings because it's not shortcomings, but like lack of love that I may have had for some of the other parts. Yeah. So I think it really brought it together and then overshadowed anything that might have fallen slightly short for me. Then I went to see the opera. Quick side note, because I am an opera lover. I've talked about it occasionally on here, but like in a past life, I was an opera singer. Not past life, like in several chapters ago in my life. Modern opera can be tricky because it is orally challenging and sometimes orally inaccessible. And I think it gets a little bit intellectually masturbatory and like what are we, like, let's look at the canon of opera and what are the operas that we are, because it's a repertory art, right? So it's like, what are we always reproducing? Yeah, cool. That's because people want to listen to it. You know what I mean? So like some modern opera, it's kind of like, what do we want to listen to this for 3 hours? And listen, I understand the history and I understand like what brought us to this place. But all that to say, I'm always like a little bit like, what direction is this modern opera gonna take? And y'all, as an opera, beautiful. Beautiful. I thought it was orally accessible. I thought that there were just moments of just sheer brilliance in the composition. Some of the singing was a little uneven, but that's another video for another channel probably. That said, as an adaptation of The Amazing Adventures of Kavalier and Clay, not good. Not great. Frustrating even at times. They rewrote parts of it. They changed the gender of some of the characters in a way that I thought like took away some of the oomph and the punch. I felt like part 6 of the book is so operatic in nature and so many elements of it that they just fully did not tackle. And they spent odd time on certain elements that I thought were unnecessary in a way that took away from some plot elements I think that they could have like really developed and given us some cool moments. But what it did do was that it sent me home with a newfound love, respect, and appreciation for this book. The subtlety and the nuance and the superior artistry that went into the crafting of this work, I have newfound respect for. I am in awe. I liked this book. Then I went to the opera and I realized I love this book. It's wild how that happens, right? But I think it's like seeing the piece of art through another artist's lens and seeing from respectfully like where they struggled from an adaptation standpoint, not from an operatic standpoint. Because I think if it's its own story, I thought they told it really well. But like from an adaptation standpoint, to then see like, oh, you did that. You did that. Yeah, it's just a really beautiful work. And I think if you haven't gotten to it for whatever reason, I think pick it up. Also, but take your time. It's not a short one. Yeah, oh, and actually this month there were some honkers, but it's not a short one. But I think it is worth your time. And I think if you go in with that, like go in with the assumption and the understanding and the eye for subtlety, I think you'll love it. But I might be also the only one who hasn't read it. So there you go. Next up was Misinterpretation. Misinterpretation was longlisted for the Booker Prize. I liked this book a lot. I think it's very like thrillery with like a capital L literary fiction, kind of like with noir elements. There's an amazing depiction of this like panther at one point. It's about an interpreter and her relationships and basically how she takes on a little too much and how her misinterpretation, I think, of both herself and others wreaks havoc in her world. And then it also kind of begs the question, like, where is she taking responsibility for that and where is she not taking responsibility for that? You know what I'm saying? So yeah, it's beautifully written. I really enjoyed it. I would not have been surprised if it had been shortlisted. I don't think it was on my predictions for the shortlist, but I wouldn't have been shocked. I think it's really lovely, and yeah, I also love the perspective. She's an Albanian interpreter, which I think is like super unique, and we don't get a lot of perspectives from that space. I think it's lovely. I think there are some things that didn't work about it. I think the husband disappears for like odd periods of time with like kind of like no explanation in a way that's like, do relationships work that way? Maybe that's why I'm single. Maybe I needed to disappear for like inexplicable periods of time in the past and didn't, and that's why I'm single. But yeah, I don't know. But also that kind of like lends itself to some of the thriller like noir elements. This kind of like inexplicable kind of like suspension of time almost. So if you're into that, I think it's worth it. I enjoyed it. It was good. And y'all, this book ripped my heart out. This, my friend Rick, and I'm going to do a haul. I had some incredible book besties send me some books. Some I got from Rick in P-Town, and some Simon sent me. So I'm going to do a haul of like book bestie titles, which is like so exciting because it's like book nerds giving you books is like, oh my gosh, right? And this was one of them. And he's been so insistent that I read this book. And I snuck it in at the end of this month because I was done with the Booker. I like needed a little break. We'll talk about this in a second, but I'm like reading 2666, which I was expecting to be done with. And I'm not because wild and crazy. We'll talk about that. But the book was Dogs. Why is no one talking about this book? Why is no one talking about this book? I am taken. I'm going to try my best not to cry because, as I've talked about already, I don't like crying on the internet. For 1,000 reasons. It is about a group of high school wrestlers. It is about drugs. It is about mental health. And it is about that tipping point of trauma. It is also about homosexuality or the exploration of sexuality, maybe. Because I think to say that is like putting like a little too fine a scaffolding on the experiences in this work. You must be ready. You must check your trigger warnings. You must prepare yourself. This felt like a slice out of A Little Life. If I'm being honest, like there were moments of this that I had visceral reactions like I did to A Little Life. So if you're down to clown in that way, you'll be in. But you got to be in the right headspace. I'm going to need like a minute. I'm trying to figure out like what's a nice palate cleanser after this, because the other book I'm reading right now is 2666, and I'm at the if you've read this, there's like it's split into 5 parts, and the 4th part is about the crimes, and it's too intense to read after this. So I'm gonna figure out, I don't know, in my like October's, it's a bunch of scary reads, and which are a little, I don't know. So we'll see. I think maybe there's a YA somewhere in here. Do I have something happy? I don't know. We'll see. But it's like 200 pages, but you feel every page of this 200 pages. I feel that C. Mallon, I believe that's how you say their last name, is it's a singular voice. Similarly to what I loved about Necessary Fiction, I feel that this is a very clear voice. I feel like the author is so sure of the way that they use words, right? And the way that they tackle structure. I think that it handles writing through drug use brilliantly. I think there are moments of this that feel like an impressionistic painting. It feels like you're able to just fully put yourself, I think, in the mindset of someone who is like on these mind-altering substances because of the way that it's written, and not done in like a try-hard way. There's only one thing that made me go, oh, really? But that's being like so hyper picky. It's excellent. This is such like I get in on personally, and we'll see. I say get in on this early because this feels like such a book talk, bookstagram, like potentially booktube, but like more of those like type of book. But I think in this way, it's like worth it, because I think some of those others get all this like weird praise for reasons that I'm like still trying to understand. And I think it's because like the popular kids call it out. So I feel like we're much more grassroots over here. So like get in on the ground floor. I think that this is I think it's brilliant. I think it's brilliant. I will yell about this forever. Rick, thank you so much for putting this on my radar. I am so grateful to you. This book is like wedged in my heart, and oh my god, y'all, it's so hard. Like you have to be in the right headspace. You have to be in the right, like from Love, if you thought Seascraper was a little depressing, oof. Next up, Endling. This is a book set in Ukraine that is about a scientist who is looking to rescue, save, rehabilitate snails that are facing extinction. And she gets caught up in the like wedding tours or bridal tours, the romance tours, as a way to fund her scientific endeavors. Then we have a narrative shift, and the book becomes this like meta fiction, and the author becomes a part of this, and she's writing about the book. I think it works. I really liked it, and I think if you are into like form bending, you'll be down. There's a moment in the middle, I think, that's called Interlude. Simon Savage and I, buddy, read this, and we went on and on about how beautiful Interlude was. It was great. I sent him a voice note about it because I think I got there first, and I was like, Interlude is like wildly amazing. And then he sent me one back and he was like, I was about to do my horrible British accent. He was like, this is some of the best writing that he's read in a long time. And I agree. I will say, as part of the metafiction piece of this, we are introduced to this character called the Yurt Maker, and Maria Reva presents it to us in this really interesting, like kind of like dialogue the first time they show up. I understand their purpose there. It feels very, Greek chorus. I understand the author's going to them to understand like her writing and how they can take these yurts and like make it one piece versus many separate. Like that is very clear, and I see the through line, and like I get why it's there. But the Yurt Makers come back. And I have not seen anybody, and I've asked, I think, multiple times for folks in my comments to let me know what they think it is, and I don't think anyone has illuminated that for me. I'll have to go double check, but like, I don't think so, because I've been on the lookout. I just don't get it. And then like, there's an event that happens within the Yurt Maker conversation, or there's like a line about like the environment that's like, wait, that makes less sense. Who are these Yurt Makers? What are they doing there? So that kind of took me out. But I loved the work. I loved its exposure to the Ukraine war. I loved that its exposure to this, like, what are they, the romance tours. I loved the exploration of the environment and kind of our impact on that. And I think it does it in this really unique, subtle way where it is just embedded and woven in and ingrained into the work versus being like a like environment, you know what I mean? And that is how I prefer to engage with that kind of like environmental activist type of fiction. And I think it's done expertly. Okay. The loneliness of Sonia and Sunny. Y'all, I've been yelling about this book since I finished it. It's incredible. It's incredible. I do think it's worth your time. Also, I think that they printed this with thinner paper, and they may have changed the pages. I actually don't know. So it's not going to look like a honker and a half. It's going to look a little bit shorter. It's totally worth your time. My suggestion for reading this work is to languish in it. Don't give yourself a timeline. Just sit with it. Just slowly work your way through it. That's okay. I think that that's the way it's meant to be written. I had a hard time describing this book, and so I like put on my like nerdy astrology hat, and I described its big three, which are like its sun, moon, and rising sign, as a way to kind of like encapsulate everything that this book is. And I think the sun sign, which is like what it shows to the world, is a beautifully written love story. Listen, it's not traditional. They don't really meet for a couple hundred pages, so you need to just sit with that because it's a family epic. You're getting lots of characters, okay? But sun sign love story, rising sign fairy tale fable. And I was a little proud of myself for this. I saw that from the beginning. There was something about the tone where I was like, this kind of feels like a fairy tale. And I mean that in like such a complimentary way. And then the further you get, our author slowly starts to integrate magical realism. But she does it in a way that totally works. Because trust me, I'm not a huge magical realism girly, but she does it in a way that works. And then she starts really talking about the form of the fable. And the fable kind of becomes this like conversation piece in the work. And I was proud of myself for that. Because I was like, oh girl, you did this, because I felt this from the beginning. So anyways, and I think she does it expertly. Because again, I think you get that feel at the beginning. You're like, huh, this is so interesting, because this is very much literary fiction, but there's something about this that kind of feels like a fairy tale. And then at the right time, slowly some magical realism starts coming in, and you're like, oh, hi, you're brilliant. You know what I mean? Side note, this was shortlisted for the Booker this year. Rightfully so. And then the moon sign, which is like how it processes emotions, is a tale of loneliness. And I think that it's split into many, many different, does she call them parts? Yeah, parts. And I think each part really takes a piece of the plot and then it filters it through this idea of loneliness and this lens of loneliness, and I think it's done really beautifully. It's such a magical work, and I think that like I could see it winning the Booker, to be really honest. I also would not be surprised if it won. I also think that not winning doesn't take away from the brilliance of the work. You know, it could really. I loved it. I think it's worth it. Go pick it up. Read it. Read it. Read it. Hi, read it. Thanks. And the last book that I read in September was The Land in Winter. I loved this. I think that the prose is incredible. Again, we've talked about this ad nauseum, but this cover is not it. The US cover is amazing. This might not come out until November in the US, but you can order it from Blackwell's. It's so good. And it might actually be out in paperback now at Blackwell's, which is even cheaper. The prose is incredible. It is a story about two couples facing like a winter storm, and then all of the humans that kind of orbit around them and their relationship. Somebody at one point told me that they were stuck inside. So I was like, I found myself like not wanting to go back to it because I was like, I don't want to read about two couples that are stuck inside and like dipping into their minds and like, is that going to move slowly? That's not what happens. It's not what happens. So don't, if that is what somebody told you to, put that out of your head because it's not reality. So, but yeah, I think it subtly handles the like topics of homosexuality and pregnancy during this time and infidelity, and just it's so great. Also homosexuality for men and women, which I think is like really interesting. I love it. And there's a scene with one of the characters in a sauna with his father, and that could be an entire book. Andrew Miller, I'm just saying. If you want to give us that book, I think they could just be in the sauna for the book. And it could be brilliant. Which I know was like exactly what I said I didn't want to read was people stuck inside. But the dynamic there was like so layered, so wild, so crazy town. There's one element that didn't quite work for me, which I've always talked about, and I'm going to go back and try to like read it to see. We're dealing with some mental health. Oh, that's another topic that we cover very expertly. We're dealing with some mental health, and then we transition to another character that's in an interesting environment that was like hard for me to unpack, and I think I like mistook one for the other, and I'm trying to see if it was a me problem or if it was like the work problem. Like, I don't know. It was also shortlisted for the Booker. I think it's wonderful. I think it is absolutely worth a read. And I will say all of these books, except for the first one that I talked about, I pick up. I would recommend all of, depending on the person and the individual, I'd recommend all of these. 10 toes on the ground. I think some of them I would recommend to anyone, and some of them I think it would be like a specific person. I do think the Loneliness of Sonia and Sunny and The Land in Winter are kind of like a universal. And actually, The Amazing Adventures of Kavalier and Clay. I think those three are kind of like universal recommendations. Like, I think that folks should read those. You know, the others, depending on like what you're ready for in terms from a theme perspective, I think that's like a necessary fiction. Like, they really have to be like in line with the themes of the work to really want to sit in that space. Same for Dogs. I think you've really got to be ready to dissect and like sit with some of those themes. I think with Endling, you got to be really interested in exploring form in a unique way. I think that with Seascraper, again, you have to be ready, a certain type of reader to like want it all kind of like thematically like laid out for you in a really clear way. And is that all of them? Yeah. So, Misinterpretation, I think too, like you have to be in that kind of like noir thrillery space where it's like you're kind of like okay with some suspension of time. Quick side note, and I think I've asked this before and I haven't gotten any responses. Have y'all, what was going on with all the themes about the flowers? There's some going on there, especially when you get to the end. It starts talking about flowers a lot, and it's like, oh, we've been talking about flowers this whole book. What were we talking about? What's going on? What's that there? Yeah. Quick side note: nobody asked, but I am reading the New York Times top 10 books of the 21st century as like my own project this year, and I'm taking it slowly and reading roughly one a month. I'm a little behind, but we'll be okay. Oh, now I'm even more behind. But this last month's was 2666 by Roberto Bolaño. Bolaño, yeah. Have y'all read this? I'm enjoying it more. Now I'm like like over halfway through the fourth section, and there are 5 sections. The first section I didn't like at all. The second section was like, okay, good. Part 3 was like, oh, this is excellent. Part 4 is overwhelming. It is. I know it's intentional because there's a lot of repetition of like very brash, crazy town things, but it's intense. So I'm excited to finish that. But like, it's if you are taking this on, I guess my piece of advice is yes, it's a honker and a half, but also like it takes a little bit of steeling yourself, I think, to get through. And it's tricky because it's like, oh well, I've been with this book for how many pages now, and then it gets hard. And again, I think it's intentional. I think that's part of it. I think that's all very like the more I'm into it, which I have heard this, like the more it comes together and the more brilliant it is. And so like I'm starting to see that, but like, whoa. Whoa. And that one has been helpful. I've been doing this with the physical and audiobook at the same time because it's not really one you can just like listen to the audiobook for. I don't think my mind wanders a little bit with this. But also I think if it's just the physical book, I would find myself like taking it way slow. And we do need to, I need the propulsion of the audiobook to help me keep going like, no, you've got this, just keep going. Yeah. Anyway, so that's kind of like my midway, halfway done book that I was hoping to have finished by the end of this month, but I didn't. So yeah. Have y'all read any of these? I know I've talked about some of these before, but that's what I've been reading. Like, 9.5 books is a lot for me. So that was what I was able to talk about. So if we've had a little bit of double dipping with some of these, I hope if you were on the fence that this convinced you. And if not, I hope it was just like another like reminder to pick the book up. Yeah. If you were already convinced before. I hope you all had a lovely reading September, and I cannot wait to be back next week, and we'll talk about October, like spooky season. I think I've got some good ones lined up, and I'm hoping it will be as successful as this month. So we'll see.